When NBA free agency opens, it's usually madness when it comes to the sheer number of transactions, player movement, and even sometimes trades that occur within the first few hours. That's followed up by days of additional signings and teams filling out their rosters before Summer League even arrives. We've seen it countless times off-season after off-season of every NBA team working rapidly to ensure they're getting the requisite talent for the needs of their roster. And while that was the case in the first few days of free agency this period when it began, the NBA saw an abrupt pause in signings and player movement, little news, a handful of transactions here and there, despite the fact that teams still have a handful of roster spots available. Why? Well, it's become pretty clear teams around the league are waiting for that one domino to fall to see the ramifications of said transaction before they move forward in completing the rest of their roster, and it's what we'll talk about in this video. If you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, then be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a video, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, when Damian Lillard requested a trade from the Portland Trail Blazers just one day after free agency opened, it didn't really come as a surprise. Dame has been dropping hints going into that offseason that he really had no desire in playing with a youth movement for guys that were years away from competing. He wanted to win now, knowing that his time in the NBA of still playing at a high level were starting to dwindle. 11 years with the franchise that drafted him and never being able to get over that hump, including the last 2 years of missing the playoffs, will make any superstar grow frustrated and look for greener pastures. But while Dame asking out of Portland wasn't a surprise, what was surprising was his demand to be traded to one team and one team only, and making it very public that he would not play for any team if he was moved to a destination outside of Miami, severely limiting the Blazers' leverage when trying to extract the most value possible for their superstar and franchise player. And because Damian Lillard is only wanting to go to one team, and because the Blazers are unwilling to trade him for pennies on the dollar as they look to rebuild their franchise, it is more than likely that this could carry out for months before Damian Lillard is ultimately moved, potentially even leading up into training camp. And it's putting the rest of the league on hold, watching and waiting to see what happens before they move forward in finalizing their roster. Now, why would a negotiation between two teams create this standoff among the rest of the league? We know that Damian Lillard will ultimately end up in Miami, and the Heat will move on from some of their players and even draft picks in order to get him. Why would that impact the rest of the league and waiting to see how this trade shakes out? Well, the problem for the Miami Heat, even though they have most of the leverage in obtaining Lillard, given they know that they don't have to offer that much to get him as he is their destination of choice, the fact of the matter is, the Heat, simply put, do not have the requisite trade assets and capital the Blazers would want in a return for Dame, given the Heat are going to be unwilling to include Bam Adebayo in a deal, and it's been reported the Blazers don't value Tyler Hero that highly, especially at his contract. Thus, in order for a trade to be completed, a third or even a fourth team would need to be involved to complete the transaction to give the Blazers enough young talent and draft capital to make it worth their while, or even an all-star in return, as the Blazers have claimed they're still looking to compete now and require an all-star in return for Damian Lillard, even though I find that hard to believe and feel the Blazers will ultimately decide to rebuild and start fresh with a youth movement. To complicate the matter further, you also have James Harden wanting out of Philadelphia after just a season and a half with the organization, wetting the bed when it mattered the most in the playoffs. Harden is looking to move on to his fourth team in just 3 seasons. Thus, Harden becomes another disgruntled star that's looking to head elsewhere, and yet another team that is holding out for the best trade offer possible and in no rush to move on him. And for the Sixers, a team that is looking to maximize the prime of Joel Embiid and build a contender around him, unlike the Blazers, they are looking for a star in return to ensure they're still a contender going into next season. As such, between Damian Lillard's trade demand and James Harden's request out of Philly, and the fact that both teams are in no rush to move on from these players and waiting to receive the best offer possible, and the fact that you're likely going to see multiple team trade for both of these players whenever they are moved, has put everything on pause across the NBA before proceeding further in completing their roster. Because even for those teams that are not directly involved in a potential multiple team trade for either Lillard or Harden, teams will indirectly be impacted as it relates to the shift in personnel across teams, the salary cap, and tax implications for the teams involved in a trade, and the potential flipping of players that were used for salary filler in a given trade, or waiving players that would be of interest of other teams and picking them up off the market. And what do I mean by that? Well, take this as one example. Say the Blazers, Heat, and Nets are involved in the 3-team trade. That would send Damian Lillard to the Heat, Tyler Hero to the Nets, along with a Heat first-round pick in 2030, Nikola Jovic, and Yusuf Nurkic. And the Blazers receive Kyle Lowry, Duncan Robinson, Spencer Dinwiddie, Jaime Jaquez Jr., as well as 4 first-round picks, 3 from the Nets that they obtained in the Kevin Durant trade from the Suns, and 1 from the Miami Heat. A lot of moving parts, and for the record, I would actually find this trade to be unlikely that it would happen, but from a salary perspective, as well as all the teams involved are trying to achieve, it actually would work. It would be a successful trade. The Heat would get Dame, that's what he wants. The Nets get an established player in Tyler Hero, as well as some young players and draft capital to work with for their future. And for the Blazers, yes, they take on a bunch of salary filler, but receive a ton of draft assets, as well as a promising young player who will be a rookie in Jaime Jaquez Jr. The implications of a trade like this, or anything similar to it, would have ramifications across the league. How? Well, in this particular instance, the Blazers are very unlikely to keep all the high salary deals of Kyle Lowry, Duncan Robinson, and Spencer Dinwiddie. But in order to offload Lillard and Nurkic's contract, they have to take in a lot of salary in return, including potentially some unwanted contracts in order to obtain multiple first-round picks. Kyle Lowry would likely be a buyout candidate, and a buyout candidate that some contending team would love to take a chance on at a minimum deal, a savvy veteran guard with a high IQ and plays hard-nosed defense. Thus, those teams interested would need to ensure they have enough cap space or enough money by way of their exceptions, whether the mid-level exception or biannual exception, to be able to bid for Lowry should they need to offer more than a vet min deal to entice him to come to their team. The same could be said about Spencer Dinwiddie, an expiring contract who could draw some interest from teams who would either be involved in another trade where he's flipped by the Blazers. Duncan Robinson and his contract is what would likely make this trade not doable for the Blazers, simply because of the fact that you're taking on 3 years of guaranteed money to a very one-dimensional player who wouldn't fit your overall timeline and needs of the roster. That said, though, by losing Lillard, they're going to need shooting, a sharpshooter that can spread the floor off the bench, who could be a valuable player to them for a year, and then you would maybe be able to move his contract a little more easily when he only has 2 years left on his deal. But either way, the point is, the moving pieces for all parties would lead to further transactions in the form of contract buyouts and flipping of assets, which will require teams to keep a close eye on the situation and ensure they have enough cap space or luxury tax space to remain below the tax aprons that are now being implemented under the new CBA that has just gone into effect. Teams are going to be reluctant to spend and fill out their roster when the situations with Damian Lillard and James Harden remain up in the air, because depending on the assets that become available, signing some of these remaining free agents that are on the market that would put them over the tax or using their full mid-level exception, they may end up regretting if a more favorable opportunity becomes available off the buyout market or is a prime candidate to be traded that would have otherwise not been viewed as one. So the rest of the league is waiting on bated breath to see how the Damian Lillard trade shakes out and how it'll trickle down to the rest of the league before making any abrupt moves. And the problem, like I mentioned at the top of this video, I could see this dragging out for quite some time while the standoff between Dame, the Blazers, and the Miami Heat continues to see who blinks first. Unless, of course, Damian Lillard gets traded tomorrow, which would make this whole video a moot point, but hey, sometimes that's how it goes in the world of content creation. I would love to hear what you guys think, though. How long do you think it'll be before Dame gets moved, as well as James Harden? Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.